When you're building community, your culture is your most important thing. And if they don't fit your culture, then they can't be a part of what you're doing. Now it's 2021. You've heard these words so many times if you're in business or if you like self-educate in business. This was like a revelation to us.
Hi, everyone. It's Kara Goldin, and this is the Kara Goldin Show. And I'm super, super excited to dive into our next guest's life and career journey. And today we're talking to Jeff Rosenthal, my friend, and just an amazing, amazing entrepreneur. I've been wanting to get him on here for a long, long time. Jeff is the co-owner, principal designer, and developer of Summit Powder Mountain and Powder Mountain Ski Resort in Eden, Utah. And he's an entrepreneurial trailblazer. It's a tongue twister this morning in the world of environmental sustainability. And he's now the co-author of a book called Make No Small Plans, which I'm super, super excited to chat with him about that. And yeah, I mean, just more than anything, welcome, Jeff. Really
Thank
excited to
you.
have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Super,
It's such a pleasure. Such a huge fan of
super.
yours, Kara.
Oh, you're so awesome. Well, it was funny. Somebody was asking me about Summit the other day, and the first, I'll never forget because a lot of my inspiration, not only are you inspiring, but somebody else that we have a mutual connection with, Rachel Sklar.
Hmm.
And I met Rachel at Summit. In fact, I met a lot of people at Summit, and I think that's probably everybody's story for anyone who has been to Summit, that the number of people that I still have connections with. And so the first one that I went to was actually before you had the mountain at Tahoe at Squaw.
Hmm.
And I remember I went with Ty, and who's another summiter, and we met there, and she introduced me to Rachel Sklar, and the two of us just started talking, and now Rachel founded something called The List, and which has just been so educational for me, and so much of sort of my learning journey has come from that. So anyway, it's all due to
Amazing.
you, Jeff. Yeah, no,
Well,
it was super.
ultimately it's due to Ty. I mean, like, Ty is incredible. She's John Legend's manager and founder of Friends at Work, and one of really like, quietly the leading activists in criminal justice policy reform. She's been doing it for a very, very long time and in a major way. And the fact that she brought you into Summit is really the key to our success. It's the fact that, I think it was the right idea at the right time, this concept of gathering interdisciplinary, intergenerational entrepreneurs, and the event you're talking about was in 2012. So it was like kind of, very much all
Early.
of us were at the beginning of our entrepreneurial journeys. And so of course, you guys all went to go on and build remarkable things. And yeah, I'm flattered to be here. I'm very appreciative, and we started Summit when we were 23 and 24 years old. So it was 2008 when we kicked this off.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it's been quite a journey.
So what made you think about it? I mean, what was sort of you were, so your co-founder and you, like, give us the backstory on that.
So I threw parties in college with Brett Lee, one of my co-founders.
Hmm.
He and I was at American University, he was at George Washington, and we were both entrepreneurs. We had our own little startups, and so we bonded on that. And after school, I had gone to New York, and he was in DC. He called me and said, "Hey, me and my buddy Elliot are throwing this event in Mexico." So the very first summit, Elliot actually did by himself. He was 19 and had a company called BizNow in DC. 19. Was he 19? No, he was like 20, 22, 23. But he got 19 people together in Park City, Utah in 2008. And he put it all on his credit card. So the second event was
In
like 6 months,
2008 too, which is
2008.
like,
Yeah.
crazy time.
Yeah. So right after the recession, of course, and we all Brett and I graduated 2 years earlier. Um, and the second event was 6 months later. It was on a beach in Mexico. And when Brett called me and said, "Hey, this is the idea that we have, and maybe you want to help us do it, invite some people, find some sponsors, whatever," I was like, "Oh my God." 15 minutes ago, I had no excuse to reach out to anybody interesting. And now you just called me with a skeleton key that gives me an excuse to like anybody that I want to reach out to, I can now call. and I have something of value to present and provide. And so, we while we were putting together that Mexico event, or it was 60 people, beach in Mexico, but many of the attendees ended up becoming like generational luminaries in their fields, whether they're impact or technology or consumer. Some really, really remarkable people were there. And our third event was at the Obama White House a month after they took office, like 150 days after we started Summit. So it was such an exponential curve for us, in terms of like this thing just kicking off and happening. But it was really necessity. It was the mother of innovation for us. Like we were young entrepreneurs, we had our own small businesses. And when you're a young entrepreneur, you typically are screwing stuff up and then hopefully not repeating those mistakes. And we were getting more wrong than we were getting right. And so just the very first time that we were around other people that were like passionately building something as entrepreneurs, startup founders, or like people had started their own nonprofits. It wasn't particular to a specific field. It was just that kind of like energy and that necessity of self-improvement. And we were all like, of course, humble because we didn't know anything. Like, everybody was very much, at the feeling that they were at the start of their journey. So people gave each other a lot of respect. So that was it. That's how we kicked the thing off.
So interesting. So do you feel like, I mean, did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or were you, I mean, did just hearing you describe what you described just now, it seems like community was such a, I mean, just such a driver. Like, did you even know what you were starting, or did you just want to bring a lot of people together? I mean, what was sort of the lead on that?
I'm very lucky that I come from a really big, lovely family. I'm in Dallas, Texas, where I'm from, right now. And my grandfather, one of his great quotes was, "The greatest luxury in life is a large extended family." So this as like a value and as an appreciation for like the depth of both the family that you have and the family that you choose, was something that was very innate in me. Um, in terms of, throwing parties is also like, it was a business, but it was also very fun in college to like gather your friends, right, and have again an
Mhm.
excuse to like get everybody together and to help steward some good times for your homies. But I think that word community, it's interesting to reflect on it. So when we did our White House event, Tony Hsieh was one of the guests. And
Mhm.
at the end of the event, he pulled us aside and he was like, "Guys, are there some people here that you wouldn't have to your house for dinner or be their friend or introduce them to your family if they didn't have their personal or professional success?" And we were like, "Yeah, of course, but that's not what we were tasked with." They didn't say like, "Hey, just bring your favorite, cool entrepreneurs or whatever."
Yeah.
So there were some people that we don't need to go into, but that, weren't necessarily of that quality that like, we really enjoyed their company or value, had values alignment. And he goes, "Well, yeah, they can't come anymore." He goes, "When you're building community, your culture is your most important thing. And if they don't fit your culture, then they can't be a part of what you're doing." And now it's 2021. You've heard these words so many times if you're in business or if you like self-educate in business. This was like a revelation to us. We had never thought about, he of course then like came out with the book Delivering Happiness, and and that was one of his like key skill sets, was understanding this. So that night, it just was a mind-blowing bit of feedback. That's when we came up with the criteria for Summit, which was: one, are these people innovators in their field, regardless of their discipline? And two, are they kind, open-minded, nice people that we would have to our parents' house for dinner if they weren't professionally successful? And so and I think that plus the idea that it was like kind of double opt-in, we met everyone that we would invite to Summit events to make sure that those two criteria were met. And not only in those early days, still to this day, we have like a team of community directors that work with us that still curate for a living in a sense. But it was always through relationships, right? Like, of course, you can write into Summit and apply to attend the events, but a lot of the original people, like yourself, have a similar story where a friend came, really enjoyed themselves, got value out of it, gave value to it, and then, invited their buddies to it.
No, that's incredible. It's something that I've been thinking a ton about because, as you know, I am the founder of Hint, but also the CEO of Hint, and a lot of my employees are millennials, and I think
Hmm.
community is something that I look back on. 15 years ago when I started Hint, it's just become more and more important in the company, and I think it's really I give it to, I think millennials get um, a lot of slack, sent their way, like, oh, they're lazy, they're this, especially by my generation, the Gen X generation. And I actually am sort of counter to that frequently in talking about millennials. I'm like, they brought community, they brought the importance of actually hanging out and being with people that you like. And
Hmm.
anyway, I think that it's such an important thing. And I've never really, I mean, obviously, I've thought about Summit as such a great thing, but I think it's really interesting because it wasn't like you wanted to go start a company. It sounds like what you wanted to do was actually bring ideas together, right? More first.
Well,
And of course,
we were entrepreneurs. We were already
yeah,
entrepreneurs. We had started different companies. Like, I think that you're kind of afflicted with entrepreneurialism or not, in a sense. Like, you certainly, it's something that can be learned. And many people that do not start their careers as entrepreneurs and build a great skill set in something else ultimately are much better at it than like guys like myself, who, like this is essentially all I was not a good employee anywhere, right? I never built a trade. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have it. There's so many people that spent time in banking that then moved into entrepreneurial activities and then crushed it, right? Or like all these other disciplines. um, so I wouldn't say that it's exclusive to people that have like a gene for it, but we were certainly always like starting our own things and building our own things. So like I would think of it as like a maker's kind of mentality that
yeah,
that I think we had early on. But to your point about millennials, just because I think it's interesting to talk about,
yeah.
entitlement culture is kind of real, but
Hmm.
that's just through exposure. Like we're the first generation to know what we're missing in a sense, based on because of the internet, right? Like in the same way that, the Arab Spring had a lot to do with the transparency of, the size of their rulers' houses or the way that politics are carried out in neighboring countries. Similarly, I think that, that impatience that you see with like, many people in my generation is just through exposure. But what I'll also say is I think it's kind of like an intergenerational PR smear campaign because, we're the first generation to make less than our parents' generation. There's less opportunities. 2008 was like the beginning of the Great Recession, right? So
Hmm.
you have this playing field that's unequal in a sense. But it's not like I can buy a house for $500,000 or for $250,000. I guess you can, depending upon the neighborhood. But it's like I think that some of the things that feel like the grounding, accomplishments of a lifetime are a bit out of reach for my generation in a way that previous generations had. So it is definitely an unfair assertion that, like millennials are lazy. It's like, well, I mean, a lot of it has to do with opportunity.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And I think that the discussion, it's something, my book came out in October and I've heard from a ton of millennials. And again, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm not uh, I think for me, the responsibility is not just to say it's, millennials are this and that. Instead, it's like, well, how do we all work together? Right? And how do we fix some of these issues? And I think also just the whole topic of mental health is also something that millennials, I think, brought forward and said,
Hmm.
we need to talk about this and we need to own it and fix it and do what we can to support each other. And, the Gen X generation wasn't doing it. Instead, if you had mental health issues, if you were, having a kid and having challenges at home, you didn't talk about it at work. I mean, it's a very, very different kind of, mentality and discussion, I
Hmm.
think, that goes on that I really hand it to the millennials for saying that we need it. And frankly, I have four Gen Zers at home. And I think it's, something I look at constantly because how is that generation different and how are they going to change? And what do you think? I mean, how do you how do you see that next generation Gen Zers and what
Uh,
would you say?
I've been from a corporate perspective, like the founders that we meet that are like 24, 25 years old are remarkable, incredible. I mean, like the people that work at Summit that, fit into that Gen Z category run our company now to a great degree. So it's like in ways it's amazing when you find people that are better at core components of your business or enterprise that are better than you. And like we've been really lucky, I'd say, with like that experience. And then in terms of, like the protests and, sort of the enforcement of civil rights for people that aren't that don't match your skin color or gender, or like the to really like sacrifice your own benefit on behalf of other people. I thought that that was something of the past in a sense. And this last year, I think Gen Z really carried the torch. And if you looked at like who was on the front lines of these police brutality protests and Black Lives Matter protests, and like the Women's March on Washington, I mean, like the leaders of these movements not only are Gen Z, they also have gotten hit to the game, and like they've been disappointed in ways at a young age that I think that are surprising to them, that like came later for us, in a sense, like other people's self-interest and like your efforts. And the reaction where I find like Gen X, and we're on such like an obscure topic now, but like it's a much more sort of
We like
independent.
obscure though. That's
Okay,
good.
okay.
That's
I don't
good.
know. I don't
That's
know
good.
the audience necessarily, but like I find that like most of my Gen X fans don't really trust the system, in a sense. Like it's very independent. It wasn't like as much of a team sport to the same degree. Groups like the Future Coalition, Katie Etter, one of like
Mhm.
the Gen Z environmental leaders. She started with the high school walkouts for gun violence. And I think what she saw is that there's like, 30 different leaders that are her age who all had these amazing platforms and millions of people behind them. And if they could collaborate with one another, they would boost their messages to a tremendous degree, right? Like we weren't hip to that. Even though Summit was like the whole idea was to gather and collaborate with people that weren't inside your own company. Like how could, our liberation be bound up together? I think that they got it and get it in a way that like we weren't really close to. So I'm excited to just take a back seat, be a chairman, not work too hard, and let Gen Z drive the bus.
And let them drive it. That's awesome. So getting back to Summit. So, obviously you guys have been planning amazing events. And so you built that mountain at Eden. Talk to us a little bit about that back in the early days. How did you decide to make that move?
I think that this was our thinking. Uh, we thought that Summit was representative of an emergent culture and ethos of like creativity and collaboration and entrepreneurship. And we felt that for movements that lasted the test of time, they needed roots, they needed a home, they needed a physical place that could be, the embodiment of that culture. I think that, we traveled, we were very nomadic in our first, say, decade of building Summit, and would move the company from place to place, move the events from place to place. Um, One, because it kept it fresh, but two, because we didn't really feel that there was like a physical location that really like embodied that culture. Um, and Powder Mountain was essentially like a broken private equity deal. They had tried to sell it for a lot more money throughout that 2008 to 2011 period. And it was just a perfectly unique moment in time before I think that these businesses turned back on in a huge way, where the mountain was quietly for sale. And we had this pre-existing community of people that, regardless of where we were going to have a fun time together. So the idea
Mhm.
that I also say that we also love nature, like the idea of being
Mhm.
in a place that was like an hour from an international airport, close enough to like the major hubs like SF and LA, and easy to get to, NY or wherever else. Um, and there, there's no streetlights, there's no stoplights in Eden, Utah. And Powder Mountain is like this sort of last great gem, if you think about it. Like founded in 1972, one of the largest ski resorts in the United States. It's 100% privately owned. It's not a land lease like the majority of ski resorts. And we really had this vision of like living in a national park. Like how could we be great stewards of the land? There's a great like Andy Warhol quote that the greatest art, is owning a beautiful piece of land and not screwing it up, right? So we, went through the process of buying the mountain. That's a whole, we could do a whole, 2 hour podcast just on that craziness. But through the again, like we were just blessed by the idea that we were young and naive, and we had really, really brilliant friends that we could engage to help guide all these different processes, whether it was acquiring the mountain or doing the due diligence checklist or how to actually raise the money and structure the deal to building roads and infrastructure and coming up with an architectural vernacular. So like I was 27 when we bought Powder Mountain and had no experience in any of this stuff. But again, it went from like, it was sort of like that first phone call with Brett. I went from like not having an excuse to like learn about all these things and get to play in the space to having like the best excuse. And because it was, such a bold vision, it attracted really remarkable, founding neighbors and amazing land planners and master developers and architects. And so we got to really like sit at the feet of greatness. And one of the things I think we're most proud of is that it came out beautiful. Like we built this mountaintop village and 5.5 miles
It's
of
incredible.
contiguous road and 5 new neighborhoods, and we have a wonderful community that's formed up there. And I mean, just to sort of fast forward to now, what's amazing is that with Summit, I think we hosted every weekend for like 4 years at the mountain to build the beat, right? Like we just never stopped hosting people. And during the week, we would do charrettes where we'd learn about all these disciplines that we had to get like an accelerated doctorate in order to not screw this up. It's like a development term for when you like learn about a specific area of interest or focus. And then we would host every single weekend up there. And what's amazing now with Summit in general is that there's now hundreds of neighbors that also are hosting their own things and bringing their own friends and using the lodges and spaces to do their gatherings. Of course, COVID permitting now. So it sort of went from this like singular orbit to having kind of like an ecosystem or a solar system of people building and hosting and growing that community up there.
I love it. Well, you are feeding into something that I talk about a lot, which is being a lifelong learner too. And even though the stuff was hard and you weren't exactly sure how it was all going to work out, you just kept jumping in and saying, "Okay, let's get the architect. Let's get right. Like let's invite some more people. Let's just keep going." And I think that I'm sure that really was also helping your curiosity too to just become better, right? And overall, so I think that's super, super awesome. And it's
Well,
great
thank
that you
you.
were able to jump forward and do that. So one of the quotes that I dug up on from Jeff, get ready, I found it interesting that you don't like the phrase keeping it real. And Jeff, why is it important to keep life surreal instead of real?
I can't, it's not my quote. It's a friend of ours named Michael Hebb, who's like
Uh,
the food provocateur of his generation. Like he's kind of
yeah,
like he was a pop-up dinner, and he understood sort of like the deep opportunity that the dinner table presents, right? Like, it could be seen as the greatest piece of human technology ever created, like where we came to break bread and collaborate and scheme for a better future for ourselves and for
totally.
others. And so this idea, with Summit events, we went from like throwing a younger, hipper TED or conference that, is lecture driven to, creating social sculpture, like having better metaphors, the idea that, through the narrative and arc and incorporation of different experiences, you can change the texture of someone's memory, right? Like you can have like something that really sticks out in your mind from the past, right? Like what was a really truly transformational experience, a peak experience. And Michael at one point was like, "Hey, people say keep it real," and we were like, "Yeah." He was like, "Don't do that. It's like you got to keep it surreal. You just got to do things that are a little bit beyond people's expectation and imagination." And I think
I
that
love that.
yeah, it's about surprise and delight. It's like these are the ways that you can and I mean, I'll give you some examples. I was thinking about this. Our DC 10 event, 2010 was probably like our first real conference. And we
Hmm.
had Ted Turner speak and Mark Cuban and Michelle Rhee and John Legend and like all these amazing talks. But we also had tea and cookies with mine and Elliot's grandmothers. They were the two living grandmas, I think, out of our four
I love
co-founders,
it.
and they literally baked, and and everybody showed up and had an incredible time. And so it was also like a window in for us that, like, the key components of experiences were happening outside of the lectures, right? They were, they were the more humanistic, the more fun, the more like sticky shared experiences that people were having. And so that's what, as we grew Summit, we started to, build towards versus like by the time you got to base camp, this was like this ideology was deep in our thinking about how we would, build and administer these events and experiences.
I absolutely love it. And you had another one. You like to say generosity breeds abundance. And I know you're talking about that a lot on your podcast as well, the Jeff's podcast, which is amazing. And he actually had me on
I
as
did.
a guest as well, but Art of the Hustle. And it's such a good podcast with so many amazing entrepreneurs on there too. So I love that you're doing that as well. And you've got I was, as you're talking, I was thinking about, I wonder, I think Jeff might have the biggest network I know of people. Like, I mean, you just know so many people. It's crazy, right? And and I believe that it's not just a hi. I feel like you actually understand people and you really have taken the time to understand people, which I think is just really lovely in so many ways. And so I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I think that's a consequence of my profession. It's what our job was, to build community, and the validation of sort of the Summit platform was being able to thoughtfully connect people in ways that would be beneficial to them personally or professionally or whatever it was. Like, it could be a health issue, it could be an existential issue, it could be selling a company, it could be hiring a performance marketer, right? Like for us, what's really fun is that, because of the nature of our profession, sort of the community that we gather, the outcome is that we know brilliant people in all of these different spaces. And not only do we know, the top people in those spaces, we know what they're into and what they're going to resonate with, right? So it made us really great, connectors, where a simple idea for us, just it pops in our heads where we're like, oh wow, these two people from these different disciplines, or maybe different generations in the same discipline, should definitely know each other and would love to collaborate because these things are complementary. It made that became really, I mean, amazing for us because we went from again like not having anything really of value to bring to the table for all of these like remarkable people like yourself, and your husband, and to having like these deep wonderful relationships that we're always learning through. So to your point about lifelong learning, like it's that's I think that it takes, you build a reputation in drops and you lose it in buckets. And there's a triangulation of goodwill. So when you talk about that generosity breeds abundance quote, that's essentially what we're thinking. Like to give without the expectation of return is the greatest way to get forward in life. It's counterintuitive and it's paradoxical, but that's our experience. It's not like some hippie woo-woo bullshit that like I read and put on a poster. It's like this was our life experience. We had no business being in 99% of the rooms that we were in, but through exposure to all of these different people and platforms and disciplines and ways of thinking and seeing and working, it made it so there was like some pattern recognition between these silos, right? So I also think that the timing is great, right? Like this wouldn't have had any value in 1995. Like these silos of different businesses were pretty well defined, whereas now we're kind of like all in each other's stuff. Like you as well, right? Like you have advocacy things that are really important to you. You're an author, you're an entrepreneur, you're a mom, you're like all of these, like you're eight, we're all like eight, 10 people and professions in one these days. So I think
So
that,
true.
yeah, Summit was just like this incredible accelerator for us and for the people that participated in it over the years.
No, I absolutely love that. So your book is coming out in October of this year. So excited for that. My book
Hmm.
had launched in October. We're
Oh,
October
yeah.
babies, right?
Make No
So
Small
we're
Plans is the name of the book.
I love it.
Thank
So
you.
tell us a little bit about it.
It's just our story, it's like it's how the four of us met. My co-founders, Jeremy, Brett, Elliot, and myself. A lot of it is just like the early days and the early team that came together to build Summit. A lot of the experiences that we had, and what we tried to make sure that we would do throughout the whole thing was like really kind of tell the real story. It's not necessarily that flattering to us. Like I can sound quite sophisticated now. I'm 36. I like did a bunch of stuff. I had a bunch of experiences, but the way that we learn these things were embarrassing often, and like I think that critical feedback is like the great gift, right? Like plenty of people will tell you like, hey, yeah, it's great, and just like never paid much attention or talk to you again or really help you grow. So ultimately, like we try to just like share the lessons that we learned throughout the process and all of the, big great stories that were definitive along the way. So but like we also feel like it's a little premature to be writing like a book like this because we're still at the front half of the journey. And I think that in terms of like expertise, like when you see a player in a professional sports league, they've played 3 or 4 seasons, they make an all-star game, and that's great, and they could be terrific. But when you see people who are like on their 18th, 19th season, have just been, like playing championship levels for that long, it's a different thing altogether. In business and impact and, like in civic participation, these are like lifetime sports, right? So the people that, we look up to the most have been in the game a lot longer than us. But I think that we're just hoping that people that are on their own entrepreneurial journeys, it can be valuable to them, and that was really what we were trying to air towards. It wasn't like how do we puff up our chests. It was like how do we tell really meaningful stories and try to explain some of the components that like led to us going from zero to where we are today, and what feels now relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's I mean that's a lot of what my book does as well. I mean, there's stories in there where even John Legend, who's one of our investors, I mean, John
Hmm.
got a preview of my book and he said I kept turning the pages and then and saying, "Okay, this is where they shut the company down." And then I said, "Wait. Oh, wait, they didn't shut the company down." And
Yeah.
it's just, it's a story of for me it was a reflection. It was actually therapy in many ways. This was my journal.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a lot, very similar. Maybe you didn't call it a journal, but the stories I would share with some friends, not all of them, but they would say, God, I'd see you and you actually held your stuff together pretty well, but there were points where you were like, you know, really teetering off of a cliff. And we were. And it
Yeah.
was just, and I think it's, but I think that knowing that, I mean, you'll learn, I think, over time too. I mean, I look at you, what you've built as pretty fantastic and pretty spectacular and stuff that you've and it's not all shiny along the way, and you had fears and failures and doubts, and you clearly, as you talked about, you had doubters, I had doubters as well, but I mean, I think at the core of it is that you tried and
Yeah.
you built something pretty damn awesome and that you
Well,
guys
thank
should be
you.
really proud of.
Thank you. I think you and I are more similar entrepreneurs. Like, there's people like the founders of Nixon, the watch company, they like performed exactly to plan their first year. Or like, Caitlin Smith at Simple Mills, like just she's lights out. It's kind of ridiculous. Like she planned it and then did it and it worked. For us in our early days, we had plenty we had a term for it, what you're referring to. It's called Final Fridays. Because Friday is the last day you can send the check in before the banks close for the weekend, right? So I think that, when you're in your early years, having those final Fridays is, like unnecessary and not to be celebrated because it's avoidable and like, it has to do with really bringing in people that have like walked the paths before to advise you in a deep way. Like it took us too long to have like a real board and have brilliant people who were like incentivized in our success, who have done it 20 times over, who are more sophisticated than you, like to like really help you down the path. We didn't really have that. I don't think you did either at that stage, right? Like, so it's avoidable and it shouldn't be celebrated. However, it also means that you're living on your edge, It means that you're like pushing it to the limit, which is typically the way that you break through, right? So like a lot of people quit early, to be
Totally.
honest with you. A lot of people could have built what we built, could have, outshined us in our space. In 2010, there were plenty of other organizations that were building communities and companies like ours, right? And conferences.
Mhm.
And most of them just tagged out before they found a model that worked, right? And like, I think that, for us, it was so, we just loved it. Like, if you don't love it, you're going to be out of the game because, like, it's hard no matter what you do, especially going from like zero to one. And someone will run circles around you because like what's work for you is pleasure for them. And so like we just absolutely loved what we did. And it made it so, it was all work and it was all play. But in order to like jump to a more sophisticated place, I think that if I were to advise people, like you don't need to do that. Like you can if you refine the idea and get to a place where like it's really thoughtful what you're doing, like, and everything takes iterations and everything takes pivots and everything, nothing's perfect, and you should start by starting and like you know let it break a little bit along the way. But the one piece of advice I would give that's counter to our experiences is I do think that like once it was clear that we had some lightning in a bottle, we had something really special. If I had to do over again, I would have put some advisors and some board members around us, earlier in the process to avoid a couple of those stressful moments.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that I've realized though is that, and probably those advisors and board members would say this too, if I don't know, maybe give them a glass of wine and had them really take a look at who they are, they wouldn't
Hmm.
have actually taken the risks that you did,
Sure.
right? They wouldn't build what you built. And so I always say to people when you're starting companies, I remember like the people that we had early that were scrappy. And I would be really sad when they were leaving and, we were getting to sort of the next level and,
Hmm.
they didn't want bosses, right? There were, I mean, I could go through, that's an hour in and of itself,
Totally.
but you have to be able to recognize as you're getting to these different stages what you need in order
Yeah.
to grow. And it's so hard. And it's probably the hardest thing about being a founder and asking yourself, like, what more do I need? But I think that those visionary founders, which clearly is what you are, I think that none of this gets started without the visionary founder, right? And frankly, when the visionary founder totally disconnects from projects, that's how they end up getting messed up, unfortunately. So
Sure.
I think I think it's something that I've learned over the years, that is really important. And while people want to come in and dot all the I's and cross all the T's and put balance sheets and EBITDA and everything else in
Hmm.
there, like without your like visionary leadership and that it's something, it's an important piece that you should not you don't let anybody ever tell you that that is not important, because it is.
I appreciate that. I agree with you. It's not often you see a brand or a voice change in something that was like founder led once it started, right? It's
Hmm.
pretty rare where like, it's the whole kind of identity of a brand shifts because it wouldn't have worked in the first place if that vision hadn't been executed on. But I love what you're saying about the people. The way I think about it, it's like those were the pirates, that jumped on your
Yeah.
pirate ship where they were like, "Where are you sailing?" You're like, "I don't know." They're like, "Great, let's rock." And
Right.
it's like they learned how to do the jobs as like the jobs came to us, right? And as the business scaled. And when you're later in a process, um, to your point, it's like the stability excitement trade-off to a degree changes. The sort of like existence in no system is where you thrive versus like the necessity of a system at a certain scale in order to really grow into something big. So there is certainly a different like, and that's why most founders aren't like founder CEOs like yourself, right? Like most are
Hmm.
more like me, where it's like, myself and my co-founders, we were really good founders, but we're not the right CEOs for our ventures at this point in time, right? Like whereas like, I always admire, folks like yourself that can do both and, and really like grew to the challenge, and responsibility to being, the person responsible day to day for the governance of the organization, right? Like I thrive with a team and love the fact that I'm not that responsible party, frankly. But I think that it's fascinating because like the people that work at Summit today are like the most capable, talented, brilliant, like people that we couldn't have attracted in 2010. That being said, the people that worked at Summit in 2010 had like the craziest ingenuity and like just pulled rabbit out of hats to like like
Yeah.
bring the venture forward, right? So there's no, I don't know how to value other than like, it's not that one's better than the other. It's that like you really do need both depending upon the stage of the organization.
And I think, but I laugh at that because I look back. People often ask me, how do you get those first people? And I said, so picture this woman who had been a tech executive with 4 kids under the age of 4 says, I'm going to start a beverage company. Come join me. Like all
Hmm.
they needed to do was have a heartbeat, right? I said, I mean, like, why should they believe me? Right? I didn't have, I was using my own money. I
Yeah.
mean, right? Like, it's just, it's crazy. And I mean, the same with you. You're like, eventually we're going to bring a lot of people together and it's going to be great. And, then we're going to go build a mountain. I mean, I owe so much to those early people who actually followed me.
Hmm.
Right. And I look at it, but I also look at those people too. And I say that, you know, they're good for the build. They don't need the go do this, go do this, go do this, right? They'll just go and they'll go get some stuff done and a bunch of watermelons will hopefully like stay on the cart, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully not too many will fall off, but they'll fall off and hopefully it won't be that big of a disaster. But those people are so critical and it's just anyway, I think it's something I'm sure you have so many stories. I cannot wait to read your book.
Oh, well,
So
thank you, Kara. I really appreciate it.
I will buy the pre-release for sure. And you have to let us know. I'm actually launching a LinkedIn Live just for authors. So when it comes out, I'm going to be interviewing people just out of
Oh,
my own
wonderful.
curiosity. Yeah. So definitely we'll have you on for that too. So anyway, where do people find you, Jeff? What's the best way on social?
I'm pretty private on social. I don't know. I'm, summit.co if you want to learn more about Summit. And, hello at summit.co if we should be collaborating in some way, shape, or form. And, I just want to say thank you again for listening and Kara for you having me on. I really am flattered and appreciative and, hope that my, thoughts and experiences are valuable and helpful to anybody that's, listening this far into the podcast and just, yeah. And then of course, if you ski, or if you mountain bike, if you just appreciate camping in beautiful places, Powder Mountain, Eden, Utah, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous spot to do all of those things.
I love it. So thanks everyone. And thank you, Jeff, so much for sharing the journey and giving so much inspiration. And I love talking about just entrepreneurs and having their own fears and owning things and, that they've done along the way. And you clearly have head on sort of achieved so much, and have shared so much of that with us too. So really super, super appreciate it. So thanks everyone. We're here every Monday and Wednesday. Give Jeff 5 stars and let everybody know that we're doing this great podcast at the Kara Goldin Show and come back and say hi. All right. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.